and thank you for joining us for this Workplace Readiness webinar. And we're going to be hearing from a range of employers for their perspectives on how they prepared to start to reopen or partially reopen their workplaces and the things they've had to consider. Although I think for the time being, we were just discussing the lovely weather and how it's really quite nice for some of us to be working from home. So thank you for joining us. It might be best if you guys want to choose the speaker view so that you can concentrate on who's speaking. We have a range of employers, as I said. We will be recording the session, just so you all know, and it will be available afterwards. And there is the Q&A function. So if you'd like to ask any questions as we go, please do. We'll kind of break halfway so that you guys can ask some questions. Lost my screen. And do we have the agenda, Carolyn? Is it on the agenda? Sorry, I'm new to this. So we're now I'm going to introduce our first speakers. We're going to have Grant Thornton up first, and then we're going to be followed by Cher Gaylor from Barclays Eagle Labs, and then that's followed up with Avenue HQ, another kind of shared workplace, and then we'll have an architect, Paddock Johnson, and then we've got John Lake from Cytec Daresbury, another shared workspace. And that will then be finishing with Merseyrail giving us some advice on the travel side. So to start us off, I'm going to introduce John and Gareth from Grant Thornton to give us the perspective from themselves as we start to think about reopening. They'll talk us through some attitudes to remote working and talk us through their roadmap. So I'll hand over to you, John.
Gareth, do you want to go first? I'll lead off. So, morning everyone. Myself and John from Grant Thornton. Just going to give you a little bit of an overview in terms of number one, how we've coped and how that's really moulding our thinking for when our offices reopen. John works in our real estate team and is not only helping us devise our strategy, but also helping lots of clients. So he's got some quite interesting information that he'll share with you. Broadly, a couple of minutes from me. I mean, our office in Liverpool is about 150 people. Obviously, we're based in the Royal Liver building. We've been very fortunate in that when we started working remotely, all of our teams were equipped with laptops and our IT worked. And one thing that we've been very grateful for is to our IT teams that it did work. And I'd recommend anyone who hasn't said thank you to their IT teams. We don't often say thanks to IT. We usually phone them when there's a problem. But certainly it's a time to give them a pat on the back. Obviously, we're a client service business. And we've been very fortunate in that the vast majority of our clients, we've been able to carry on doing the things that we do. That is helping our clients bill our clients and more importantly get paid for it. So business for us has worked probably better than I anticipated, and given I'd only been in Grant Thornton for 6 weeks when we started, I was obviously concerned, but the way in which you handled it has been excellent. The things we've really focused on has been our clients and our people really, and people has been the key element that's come out of this for us and is really have a focus in our thoughts for the future. So what we found has been the communication that we've needed to have is we've probably got more contacts with our people than we've ever had before. We've tried to maintain our understanding of where people are by having regular surveys, which has revealed some quite startling facts, to be honest, and I think John's going to share some of that with us. And then we're obviously trying to plan for working from home. Who the people that we've had to support and who found it difficult was certainly families with children, particularly solo parenting families. We're probably in the most difficult stage of lockdown, with no schools open and no wider network of family for child support, but also young people who are trying to work either in shared houses or in small flats. So all of those aspects have been things that we've tried to address to a greater or lesser success, to be completely honest. And the things that we've really tried to focus on are what are the things that we've missed from the office, and when we go back to the office, what are the aspects of our job, the social aspects that are things that absolutely must be done in the office, because there's no doubt we've had lots of win-wins from working from home, but there's also been lots of things that we've certainly missed out on and we're not doing as effectively. So probably at that point, I'll probably just hand over to John, because lots of what John's going to talk about are things that we're thinking of as a firm and actually actioning, but it probably gives a wider context to what we're seeing with some of our clients as well.
Okay. Thanks, Gareth. So pause whilst I share my screen, which I'm hoping you will be able to see. Let me know if anybody can't see that. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, good. All right. I'm going to be covering 3 topics very quickly in the next 5 minutes. I'm based in London, so this has I hope not a London bias, but certainly it's taken from a viewpoint of London. I work in Grant Thornton's real estate advisory team, which is based just off the city centre. But I want to look at 3 topics. Firstly, looking at, as Gareth mentioned, how employers and employees have responded to remote working. What's the impact of COVID-19 on occupied property? And as a clue, it's not all about returning to work. And then looking at some solutions that we are already seeing around how employers and employees are coping with returning to work and the new workplace. And I don't seem to be able to change my slide, interestingly. There we go. So GT shut its doors probably about a week before lockdown was formally announced. And one of the first things that we in Real Estate Advisory did was to reach out to our clients and colleagues, of probably about 7,000 people we spoke to in all, to understand their attitude to remote working. We reconducted the survey about 8 weeks later. So first of all, we conducted it just at the end of March, and then recently in the middle of May. And what we found was in all but one case, some of the trends that we were seeing at the beginning of the survey were sustained, if not increased, after a period of about 8 weeks under lockdown. And I guess probably the key 4 points that we really saw was that even after 2 months, employees by and large were still embracing working from home as an alternative to office working. Most, if not everybody, had found a discrete place to work which worked for them. They had, by and large, good IT support. They had, quite importantly, an ordered work-life balance, a strengthened relationship with their family, and a positive attitude on mental and physical well-being. And I think one of the key things that came across is that client relationships, as Gareth pointed out, haven't suffered. There's definitely been a feeling of solving problems together, and common meeting platforms and protocols like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and other ways to speak to colleagues have broken down perceived barriers to client interaction. And I think, as Gareth pointed out, we've probably had more interaction with clients, not just within the UK, but internationally, than we probably would have had before. So our feeling very much from conducting these 2 surveys was that the majority of the workforce is still ready and willing to remain at home for at least some part of their working week. So not everybody is willing to remain at home, and repurposing the workplace and restoring confidence to allow core employees or importantly vulnerable employees to return to work is definitely taking center stage at the moment. And HR and risk and legal departments across corporations are dominating that agenda. But it's a long road ahead, and we believe that there won't be a rush to return to work, particularly in large urban areas where commuting to work, at least in London, remains a vast unsolved barrier to actually getting back to the workplace. And that in any case, social distancing is going to significantly impact the populations that can occupy a workplace anyway. We see the road moving away from the focus to actually making the place a safe place to work as being largely happening in three distinct phases. The first phase is, of course, safety first, restoring confidence. The second phase will focus around reducing operating costs, drastically repairing damaged cash flows and reducing long-term liabilities and commitments. And then the third part, which almost works hand in hand with that, is reinventing occupational space. Now that we've realized that working at your desk and meeting clients and colleagues, two of the key functions that you went into the office for, no longer needs a 60-minute commute. So let's look a little bit at phase two. Finance directors and CEOs across the corporate world will now be under huge pressure to reduce spend wherever and however they can. Property, the second or third largest commercial spend after labor and IT, will be scrutinized, and we should expect companies to exercise all lease breaks and all lease expiries, irrespective of some of the operational challenges that this will impose upon employees and on the company. It's important to remember that as we move towards a functioning property market, there is no longer a secondary subletting market anymore. All corporates are in the same boat, and handing back space to landlords is often the only option available to a lot of companies. It's hard to say how much space will be reduced, but based on the conversations that we've been having with a number of international companies, they told us that they're expecting reductions of anything up to 40% in their occupational space over the next 3 years. That agenda to reduce occupational space and cost has to dovetail with the changing attitude to work-life balance that employees, at least from our experience, want to continue. How will that manifest? No one really knows, but we can expect different approaches for different companies, and a lot of good ideas will be shed along the way as we realize that perhaps some good ideas aren't working. But these are some of the concepts that we've seen and we've discussed with some clients. The first concept is the concept of workplace rotation, already being rolled out by a number of corporates across the UK, where teams spend only a few days in the office each week and work the remainder of the week or the month or the quarter from home. Space is repurposed to open plan where it wasn't already. There's no room for dedicated space or one person, one desk anymore. And as social distancing eases, the opportunity to take space away from the corporate liability is increased. And it's done so on an opportunistic, not a discretionary basis. Populations returning to work will not increase. The radical endpoint of that is that you move towards almost an office-free office, so that the retained space is repurposed only to showcase product or to meet and greet staff and clients or for training and coaching. Only the critical core office functions are likely to remain on site. Typically the C-suite, probably IT from an operational point of view, and a number of core back office functions like legal and HR. So where does all the released office and retail space go? We're at an early stage, but there's clearly an agenda for a discussion between willing landlords holding vacant, empty, and usually old office and retail stock, and willing tenants to take up repurposed stock as affordable residential space. It's going to need foresight from planners and flexibility and a change of mindset by landlords, but we see the need and the resources to be there in a way that we've not seen before. The other thing that will change is a move from the working centre, so that people that choose to work remotely still feel the need to socialise with colleagues or with people other than their family during their working day. And the collaborative and co-working space, which has previously been dominated by folks such as Readiness and WeWork, moves from city centres towards more urban areas. I wanted to quickly share with you, very quickly as a conclusion, a suburban co-working space that I'm personally involved with, called Hatcham House in southeast London, which is a repurposed Victorian liberal club, which has been repurposed for corporate collaborative space working to provide a working space for home-based employees to communicate and network. But it's run and operated by a team largely of young people who've been keen to enter the work market, but have had a barrier to entry. And that's been driven by a separate local initiative called Facework. And then the space is also used out of hours for local community events, which adds revenue to the initiative where it's not already being paid for by occupiers in the workplace. Expect some of those things to continue in the long run. And that's really it. That was just a quick sort of summary of our thoughts. Very happy to talk to others either on this call or separately afterwards about any of these points.
Thank you very much, John and Gareth. That was really useful. John, I don't know if you've got, it's probably not an easy question to answer, but what's the kind of time scale or potential time scale for some of those phases? You talked about kind of in terms of, you know, the floor plates, that's more of a kind of medium longer term decision for employers depending on the lease term. But
I think a lot of it's going to be driven by the rollout. I mean, thinking about UK and international occupiers and their portfolios, you typically have a 3 to 5 year journey to take reductions specifically of the 25, 35, 40% reduction size. But I think the important thing is, whereas before the agenda was often, well, we could take this lease break, or we could just sublet it, you know, in a few years, take a new lease, get some breaks in, and give ourselves flexibility. You're going to find that opportunity to sublet space, to take that option away, to effectively trigger the downsizing of your space over time, to be something that is going to have less choice element in it, because there isn't going to be other people wanting to take up the space that you shed. So the opportunity to shed space immediately and imminently is going to be scrutinized, particularly in the first 12 or 18 months.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I've also realised I forgot to introduce myself and our co-host, Professional Liverpool, at the start, so apologies everyone. I'm Claire Delahanty and I'm the Professional and Business Services Lead at Growth Platform, the growth company for the City Region. And Professional Liverpool have kindly joined us with this webinar, and their Chief Executive, Andrew Ruffler, will kind of take over hosting duties halfway through. So I'll introduce the next speaker, and then you'll hear from Andrew midway. He'll do some questions. So any questions, please feel free to ask them on the function there. So next, we're going to hear from Cher Gaylor, who is the Ecosystem Manager at Barclays Eagle Lab at Man Island. And we'll hear how she's been tackling this phase within a shared workspace. Cher, over to you.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
That's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Claire. So as Claire said, I'm Cher Gaylor. I'm the Ecosystem Manager for our Barclays Eagle Lab in Liverpool. So very quickly, Eagle Labs are incubator spaces. They are based nationally across the country. We're kind of a real forward-thinking, innovative part of the bank, which is Barclays Ventures. So when I was asked by the Growth Platform and Claire to kind of join the event, we asked to cover off a few different points. So kind of what support and steps have we taken during this period and how we will take them forward, what's kind of been tricky and how we've overcome it, and what will it look like kind of going back into the space, and what support do we think businesses may need as they kind of move forward into what is this new normal way of kind of working. And then following on that, we partner with Avenue HQ in our Liverpool space. So Luke, I'll introduce at the end, and we'll talk about kind of the logistics and the services of what the physical space will look like. So kind of going back to the beginning, what support and steps have we done as the Eagle Lab? So we've had to kind of be real, even more forward thinking than we are. We've probably kind of gone forward more 2 or 3 years in the space of a few weeks. So my role has been firstly prioritising one-to-one support with our businesses, and that's both residents and businesses within the ecosystem that we were supporting before the shutdown happened. So it's been really key for that constant communication, as already been mentioned. Surveys, so we've been asking surveys every time we've done a one-to-one conversation. We've kind of had a discussion around the survey to get that real-time feedback of what businesses need, what support they need, and how we can support from both an incubator space and from a banking point of view as well. That's also been tricky for businesses. And just making sure that we've been customer focused. That's been our priority throughout all of this. We are customer obsessed. So being customer focused has been our priority. So kind of what's come out of this one-to-one support and what we will take forward as we grow within the Eagle Labs. Firstly is probably our events programme. So we've switched very quickly onto a virtual programme, and that's been both nationally and locally. And what we've made sure that on them events, they've obviously been really relevant and key topics, but it's also making sure that we've been engaging our senior leadership on them calls and our programme leaders, just to make sure that the businesses and people on the events have got the opportunities to really ask them the questions and get the answers from them. And it's just been an opportunity for them to really see kind of who is on the senior leadership team and what they are doing from their levels to make sure that we are kind of moving forward for that support. But then also taking that events programme and running them locally for our local residents and obviously the businesses within our ecosystem. We've also then kind of engaged with our partners around capital enterprise and their funding and mentorship programmes. We've been making sure that we can offer them services to our businesses so they can really kind of ask the experts about kind of what the future funding will look like for their businesses, whether it's a startup, whether they've kind of had to pivot or whether they've had to pause due to the current situation. Then we moved on to mentoring. So we currently partner with Codebase up in Edinburgh. And we do offer that one-to-one support, but we've kind of taken that up as a next level following feedback. And we now offer up more one-to-one support around mentoring with the Cambridge Judge Business School as well. So that's offered for our residents and, as I say, also alumni and businesses that we have been ongoing and supporting. But then also kind of banking support. So we are experts in banking, so making sure that we've got that relationship managed, ongoing support. So any businesses that have come up with any blockers or any difficulties, we've got that banking support to be able to answer them questions for them. And lastly, wellbeing, just making sure that the businesses and their wellbeing is being looked after, and colleagues' wellbeing as well. Because I think it is really, really important. You know, people have taken it to adapt into this very, very differently. But wellbeing obviously has to be at the core of what we're doing for all of our businesses and all of our colleagues. I think kind of the trickiest part of all of that is kind of making sure we're engaging all of our businesses. Each business is very different. Each business could be a very different part in their business growth or in their journey. So it's been making sure that we can engage all of them to make sure that they're all getting the benefit from being an Eagle Lab resident or an Eagle Lab alumni. And again, that'll be something that we will take into kind of the new normal moving forward, and that constant communication, that constant engagement to make sure that we are putting the customers at the heart of what we're doing and making sure that the decisions are based on customer feedback. That's been kind of the key message throughout all of this. So quickly kind of before we introduce Luke, we asked kind of what support or what would it look like when we return, what support do we think businesses may need. So it's kind of going to be that connectivity piece. So businesses with no physical events or no physical networking may struggle to make them connections. So it's making sure that we really support them with that connectivity piece. Wellbeing, again, keeping that as a priority, keeping that as the heart of what we're doing to support these businesses, and also engaging with the local ecosystem. And that's to make sure that we've got a clear guide of support. We've got absolutely fantastic kind of programs and expertise in Liverpool. So it's making sure that we can support businesses with them programs, and we've got kind of clear guidance of where they can go to get that support, whether it's business continuity, whether it's startup, or whether it's kind of pivoting what you've had to do with your business during kind of what's happened. So that's kind of what our journey has been in the Eagle Labs. As I say, it's a nationwide incubator space, so it's been very different up and down the country, but they've been the core actions that we've tried to put in place and steps that we will take forward. So what I'll do now is I'll introduce Luke Roberts, who's one of the directors in Avenue HQ, which is our partner in the Liverpool Eagle Lab, and to kind of talk about what the logistics of being in a physical space will look like, and what services may change, or how we can adapt to get them businesses into a co-working space. So over to you, Luke.
Thank you, Cher. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, before I just get started, I just wanted to stress some of the things that Cher was saying. Eagle Labs have done a fantastic job in keeping the conversation going by arranging all these virtual events for people who use our space. But I think one of the things that people are most looking forward to is that informality of working in a physical place. People do not simply organize a Zoom to have an off-the-cuff conversation. So one of the things that I certainly can't wait to be back for is just having those informal water cooler conversations, or those, you know, those walk to Tesco to get your lunch, all these little things that we are going to miss as the working from home movement continues. But anyway, so that was just something I wanted to piggyback on to share. So yeah, thank you first of all for inviting me to speak at this event. For those who don't know me, my name is Luke Roberts. I'm the operations director. I'm one of the founding members of Avenue HQ. Avenue HQ is a facility that started off opening in Liverpool in 2017 in the Man Island buildings on the waterfront. We opened as a co-working space, which also was an event hosting space. Also a place for meetings and a place for companies to house themselves. And we base ourselves on the smaller size companies or regional teams or project-based teams. And our sweet spot for companies that we house or teams that we house are around the 1 to 25 person. So that is the kind of average capacity that we have within our companies based in our spaces. Fast forwarding 3 years, Avenue HQ now operates in 2 cities. We have 2 spaces in Liverpool. As I say, we're talking about the Man Island one. We have one in St. Paul's Square. And we also have our biggest facility in Leeds, and that's based in East Parade, in the heart of the business district. So across the 3 sites, we have over 600 members. Rewind a few months, we were having 2,000 people through our doors for events and meetings every week. And then also 2 years ago, we also thought we would open some bars and restaurants to combine with our Avenue HQ offering. And we launched the Your Local Social company, of which we now own Man Island Social, East Parade Social, and St. Paul Social. So I'm operations director of Avenue HQ and the socials. So obviously we've been faced with a double-headed challenge in hospitality and workspace when the government announced that we can't go to work and we can't go to restaurants and bars. Couldn't have been in a worse position for us. But I think the important thing is that we've had to all adapt quickly and go hour by hour, minute by minute, sometimes second by second. And the thing I really want to stress is that everybody's in this together and everybody's learning as they go. And an important message that I want to kind of get across is that we need to offer each other support in this. And there's some great think pieces around, you know, trying to help companies, individuals out, because everybody feels a different level of comfort, especially in shared facilities today. So it's just about getting that conversation going. And I want to just talk quickly about things that we're doing in our physical spaces. Predominantly, I'm going to talk about the workspaces that we have. And maybe for some people watching, that could offer some simple tips and tricks, how you can make your spaces safer and ready for the kind of post-COVID world. So yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about now. Okay, so first of all, it's pretty tricky for me because I got to come from 2 perspectives. A, we're an employer, so we employ over 70 people. But Avenue HQ also operates service operations. So we have a lot of spaces which are either shared or open to the public. One of the great things about Avenue HQ is that even if you're not a member, you will find yourself using the facilities. I'm sure lots of people have been into our Liverpool sites watching this today. So what I want to talk about is how do we cope with A, the change in behavior, B, the change in requirement, and then also keep things safe. I'm for one who believes that the office is very much going to be part of the future. There's a reason why people have had offices for forever. I don't think a few months away from the office is going to change things in, long term. I think it's just going to be different, and especially different in the mid to short term. So I'm just going to talk about, first of all, what we're doing on our physical sites, and how can we make things safe, and how can we make things ready for the post-COVID world. So what we've done on our sites is distribute a document called Ready for Change. And this is for anyone who has an office or a workspace on one of our sites. And what it does, it really clearly breaks down the steps that we've taken to physically make these spaces safer for everyone who uses it. I'm going to quickly just talk through what we have in this. And again, you might want to jot down some notes about how you can make your spaces more safe. There's some great tips here. So first of all, obviously, frequent and deeper cleaning. I know that sounds obvious, but also it's not just down to the cleaning company to do the cleaning. Everybody has a responsibility to now keep the spaces safer more than ever. So educate your employees, educate people who come into your spaces, how they can keep cleaner, and make it idiot proof. Put signs everywhere, set up hand sanitizing stations, just do what you can to make it as simple as possible for people to do that. A second thing is learning to prioritize private space. What we've done at Avenue HQ is worked on a signage policy. I'm going to give you a quick example. I've got some props, very blue pizza of me, of one of our signs, which we have at all our receptions. We've clearly made a three-pillared approach to our signage, in which we have H points, Q points, and then safe seats. That's a really, really simple way in which you can make your workspace safe. The H points look like this. Doesn't take much to make, but it's simply sanitizing hand wipes. We put those all over our spaces, so everybody knows if they need to clean something or keep something clean, they'll know where they're going to be and what is expected to be in there. Cue points. I'm sure you've seen these everywhere now. Very simple. There we go. Very simple spots. Just, again, make it idiot proof. Make it very clear where you want people to stand, where you want people to queue, especially at receptions, especially in shared areas, again, just to make people feel more safe and to physically be safe as well. We've also introduced safe seat stickers. As you know, Avenue HQ has a focus on co-working, so we've had to ensure that even shared facilities are going to be safe. So again, making it very simple where people can sit to get rid of the blurred lines, which you will find upon the return. Even if it is gradual return, there will be some people who aren't quite sure what to do. So apart from clear signage, I'd focus on better airflow. A lot of people don't realize that the aircon is limited to save you on energy bills. I'd really recommend getting in touch with some of your air service providers and speaking to them and essentially enabling them to crank up the levels of airflow in your space, because you'll be amazed how much it can be improved simply by just looking at the systems that you have installed. Again, we've been looking at updating simple policies, which again, you will have whether you have a shared or private space. So that is looking how you use your meeting rooms, looking how you use guests. Are they necessary? We've looked to invest in some video conferencing rooms. Again, we understand that the importance of a physical meeting, yet especially with public transport, I'm sure motor travel, we'll talk about this a bit later. Right now, it may not be necessary to travel city to city. So how can we basically prepare for meetings which we may not have to travel for much further. So there's some of the simple things that we're doing. We're also looking about how we can change our spaces to become more of a workspace for a purpose. And workspace for a purpose is something that GT focused on before, and that is not only are we looking at how these are going to be used differently on a day-to-day perspective, but also how people are going to use it for a set purpose. For example, a team building day. For example, a set meeting. We're going to shift our model to focus on the flexibility, which means you can rent an office by the day, you can rent an office by the week or month. Again, it's looking at your commercial agreements in which companies have with their landlords now. Not everybody is going to be able to adapt or sign a you know, a 5-10 year lease, especially a smaller company. You know, no one knows what the future is. No one knows what 6 months will look like. We can try and predict all we can, but no one could have predicted this. I don't think anyone could have predicted what we were experiencing a week before it happened. So again, our focus is going to be flexibility. And my advice to you is, you know, in times of uncertainty, turn to flexibility and look for a physical space which will be able to align with your goals of remaining flexible as a company, and that is the best way to ensure safety. I'm going to just focus on by stressing a couple of beliefs that I have as an operations director, and that is to, when you can't predict the future, is to try and build it and try and be proactive rather than reactive. As I say, be bold and try and make some moves in what you think will be best for your company, but yet remain flexible. And that's why I say, if you are looking to take a big risk on taking a large space or sign a long lease, I'd say hang fire and look for a flexible agreement, because I think that is how the world is going to change. That is how workspace is going to change. Yes, it may look different short term, but it's going to exist for the long term. So that's just how I'm going to end. So yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Luke.
No problem.
I feel really bad now that I didn't bring any props, and I wasn't intending to move around. I feel like I've missed out completely on that one. But fantastic overview. Thanks very much for that. And thank you to our other speakers as well, Gareth, John and Cher. As Claire said right at the start, we'll be taking some Q&A towards the end. So if anybody does have any questions to any of our previous speakers or any of those that are coming up, please just fire them into the Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom, and we'll go from there. I presume everybody can hear me, so I'm going to crack on. We've got 3 more speakers coming up, covering a range of different, I suppose, skills and expertise and settings for their workplaces. And we're going to start off with somebody from a professional services organisation based over on the Wirral, Paddock Johnson Architects, and Victoria Alderton, who is one of the directors there. Can I hand over to you, Victoria, for giving an overview of your situation and the impact that this has had on you and going forward?
Thanks, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, fire away, Victoria.
Great. Yeah, as Andrew said, we're an architectural practice. We're an SME. There's 18 of us based here in Port Sunlight Village in the old Victorian schoolhouse. We adapted quite quickly to home working. We had all the technology and infrastructure in place for remote working. So from the end of March, we've all been working from home. That's worked quite well, and we've managed to keep in contact via Microsoft Teams and Zoom meetings. But we're just in the process of starting to see how we can bring people back to the office. And actually, this is the first week where we've started to have a small number of staff back in the office, as you can probably tell from the background. We're based in a listed building and we work in conservation, and actually our office and our building is a huge part of our identity. And whilst technically it's very possible for us all to continue to work from home, we're starting to think about how in the future, if that continues, we can ensure that that identity has got across in different ways. We're also thinking about how, as Luke mentioned, how those sort of informal interactions and collaborations, how they can still take place as a creative industry and a design practice. On a day-to-day basis, we have a lot of casual collaboration with each other in the office. We're in one big open plan space, and people are always turning around and asking people's opinion on design. People look over your shoulder as they walk past and provide comments. And then we have lots of internal design reviews and design collaboration. And I think that's one of the things I've missed particularly during the lockdown process, is that collaboration and interaction with the other members of the team. So I think we're going to have to look to technology to assist with that in part, and get a bit better at doing virtual design reviews. But yeah, it's certainly one of the bigger challenges we face. We're quite fortunate from a safety point of view that by having a rotation of staff, even up to half the team at any one time. We can maintain social distancing, and we don't have a huge sort of demand on shared facilities. So by making some relatively small adjustments in terms of cleaning and who's in the office at the same time, we can deal with that. So I think, like I said, the bigger challenge for us is how, you know, when we meet new clients, we often invite them to our building, and I think it says a lot about us and what we do. And obviously buildings is our industry. So yeah, in the coming months, that transformation phase will be looking at how we get that identity out in the virtual world.
Thanks, Victoria. Some really interesting points that you picked up there, which I think we'll cover in the Q&A at the end, but it links to something that certainly John was talking about from Grant Thornton earlier, which is around the opportunities that are presented to the likes of architects and design professionals coming through this period. Because John talked about the retrofitting of buildings, for instance, the repurposing of buildings, and of course you're in a historic setting there in Port Sunlight. So there are opportunities coming out of this situation for professional firms like yourself. Well, as I say, we'll pick up on that at the end. Shall we move on to our next speaker very quickly? And it's John Leake, who's based over at Daresbury in the SciTech building there, to give his view on, I suppose, the different types of workspace that he looks after and his businesses occupy over there, and the community that exists. John, could you just sort of elaborate on how this has impacted you and the companies that you're working with?
Sure. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, and I think obviously it's quite important in terms of this context, because I've been interested, you know, hearing from Luke and Cher and John, you know, where we're talking, you know, large corporate organizations, maybe in city centre locations on one hand, work that Luke is doing around sort of smaller businesses, but again in city centre locations. For his here at SciTech Daresbury, we aren't in a city centre, we're in quite a different physical location. And of course, we've got different types of companies. We've got 150 technology companies. They range from startups to businesses which have probably got up to about 100 staff on the site. And they're ranging from digital companies to lab-based life science businesses. And therefore, they've got very different needs in terms of how do they continue their operation over this time. I suppose what's been interesting for us is that actually through the lockdown, we've probably had somewhere between 5 to 10% of our companies with a presence on the site through that period of time. So prior to all of the easing of the lockdown restrictions, because if you are a lab-based business, then it's pretty difficult to convert your kitchen to be carrying out what experiments that you need to do. You have to be in the workplace. And we've certainly seen also some companies where they've had some staff being present, not necessarily on a 5-day-a-week basis, but on a fairly regular basis over the time, either because they've had internet challenges or actually because they've had just challenges in terms of the work environment at home, and it hasn't been suitable really for the work that they've been doing. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the sort of next 1 to 2 months. You know, from the feedback we're getting, we expect to see a gradual return of some people within the businesses, probably on a sort of rotational basis into the office. In terms of kind of making sure that we were prepared for that, we started doing work back in late April. So it was probably about 2 weeks in advance of the government announcement about the easing of lockdown restrictions and the potential for people to return to work. And we went through a pretty detailed process looking at and establishing new site operating procedures, carrying out the necessary risk assessments, putting in site plans, signage plans, and the implementation of PPE in advance of that. So a lot of intensive work over about 3 weeks, and ready to sort of implement that and launch that on May the 18th. So it was about a week after the announcement by government in terms of easing of lockdown restrictions. And we provided that really as a very detailed document to all of our companies on the site here. And probably important from 2 perspectives. One actually was a reassurance to them that they could also provide to the staff that actually should they return to site, then it was a controlled environment in the new norm, as people use that phrase, for them to come and safely work from. but also actually was quite important in terms of actually some useful detailed information that they could use and adapt for their own individual operating procedures as and when staff return back into the office or laboratory. And I suppose kind of a number of key elements to that plan. Luke certainly has highlighted a number of them already. Obviously a key factor, certainly at this point in time, is around social distancing, and what do you need to put in place to ensure social distancing can take place. So for us, a lot of it was actually trying to envisage one-way systems around our buildings. How can we get people safely into the building and out of the building, but actually up the staircases, and doing that in terms of kind of one-way systems of staircases going up, staircases going down, and one-way systems around the corridors. But also actually starting to look at how do we, how our toilets, kitchens, meeting rooms, other common areas are going to be used to ensure that social distancing is possible. And finally, I think, as Luke highlighted as well, is looking at sort of your reception service and ensuring that actually for the safety not only of our people coming in, but also of our staff, that those operate safely. Secondly, obviously, implementation of PPE, hand sanitizers, plastic screens. Again, as Luke highlighted through his props, in terms of actually having those sort of facilities in obvious locations so that people know when they can and are expected to clean areas that they might be using that are common areas. And obviously changing all of our sort of cleaning regimes around the place. And a little bit like Luke, I think we came to the conclusion is that actually as you're putting in all of these new procedures, the one thing that you can't have too much of is signage. And let me see if I can share something. Hopefully people can see that. You can never have too much signage around the place, because otherwise, actually, I found even from my own perspective that sometimes you end up coming down the staircase when you should be going up it. So just making sure that everything is absolutely clear. We're kind of alongside all of that. The other thing, of course, that we've been doing, and again, Cher talked about it in some detail, is looking at how do we continue to support our community. Ours is a business community, a technology business community, and we move very quickly from kind of carrying out physical events to online events that are actually probably being carried out on a more frequent basis than we've done before. And that's been moving it from a whole process of initially making sure companies were aware of all of the business support and funding support that was available through government to support people through COVID-19. And I know there's many people who are on the call today who've helped us through that in terms of Ask the Expert sessions and through our monthly Business Breakfast Network event. But actually moving into kind of some very specific areas, again, that we surveyed our companies and they've come back and said, actually, areas that we want to be focusing on and prioritizing is things from how do we optimize our cash flow, how are we enhancing our digital marketing activities, and all the way through to actually how might we develop the business strategy to pivot our business from a market vertical which today has dried up and will continue to have dried up for months to come, and actually taking our capabilities and targeting them into either new market verticals or new geographies around the world. So that's been a really important part of in terms of ensuring that we supported our community, connected into our community, and actually has given us the opportunity to reach out and engage with people in our community who aren't even in the Northwest, aren't on the site at Daresbury, but actually may not even be in the UK. And we've been bringing people into events. We've got a business pitch event tomorrow with our companies, and one of those is an international inward investor from Bulgaria who will be dialing into that from their hometown. And I think probably the final point, and hopefully it's a useful segue into our next speaker, is actually we're now starting to survey our companies and the staff within those companies about how they might be using public transport in the future. Because again, part of it is, it's not just about how do people, how do they feel comfortable about coming into the workspace, but also actually is about, for those that are using public transport, how do they feel safe about using that as a means of actually getting to the workplace to start off with. So hopefully that's been some sort of useful information in terms of what we've done here, some of the challenges and issues that we're facing, but also envisaging what we will be looking to do in the future as well.
Brilliant, thank you, John. I joked with Luke as he finished his talk about the use of props, but there is a serious point here which John has highlighted, that they are extremely useful. I think it's an example that everybody, I suppose, could take away, is that having some very nicely designed signage and props around the workplaces and spaces are going to be helpful to individuals as they return to work. It goes without saying. Yeah, so we segue nicely then into Suzanne, who's going to talk to us more from the infrastructure perspective. So can I swiftly hand over to you, Suzanne, and we'll talk around that area before we have a Q&A.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. So Merseyrail's priority since the start of the COVID pandemic has been to provide the best possible service for key workers and those making essential journeys. So we were impacted by the COVID pandemic ourselves. So we've had staff who've had the virus, we've got staff who are shielding and who've had to self-isolate. So we had to reduce our services. So as we went into the COVID pandemic, we had to change from a 15-minute service during the day to a 30-minute service. And then as we got really impacted, we had to take that down and run a 12-hour service between 7 and 7. And 2 weeks ago, when the government made the announcement that restrictions would begin to lift, we were in a position where we had more staff had returned to work. We had less staff needing to self-isolate. And so we began our steps to recovery. So we introduced more services 2 weeks ago. So now we're back to running services from 6 o'clock in the morning at a 30-minute frequency throughout the day to 7 p.m. and then at a less frequent service up until midnight. And we're running services between 8 and 8. We found that our passengers are listening to our advice, and they're listening to the government advice, and they're only making essential journeys at the moment. So we've been really clear in our messaging, and it's in line with the national messaging, is that you should only travel by public transport right now if it's for an essential journey, if it's absolutely necessary. And the reason for that is it won't always be possible to socially distance during your journey. So we're being really clear to our passengers that if they do need to travel, to wear a face covering to protect themselves and other passengers during their journey. So we've very much taken a step-by-step approach to starting to recover our business. So we're closely monitoring government guidance, we're taking advice from Public Health England, and we're listening to the rail industry as well. We have a tactical group who are meeting every day, who are looking at passenger flows and are listening to feedback from our passengers. But as some of the other panellists have touched on, what is key to our recovery and to getting passengers back on the network when it's safe to do so is confidence, and to give passengers confidence to travel. So we've begun educating our passengers and to try and get them used to the new norm that will await them when they return to the network if they're not already travelling. So just as the other panellists have mentioned, we've installed signage at our stations. So we've got a range of socially distancing signage at stations. We're also looking at queue management for our higher footfall stations, and having queue and marshals around our network to help once passengers do start returning to the network. We're doing everything we can to keep our staff and passengers safe. So we've increased our cleaning regime. We're using specialist products that provide a protective barrier, a protective surface on touch points on trains, for example. But we also need passengers to play their part. So at the moment, as I've said, we are really clear, and the message at the moment is to only travel if it's absolutely necessary. But for those people who are travelling, we're asking them to travel outside of peak times if they can, obviously to wear face coverings, to use hand sanitizer and to wash their hands before and after travelling, and to use contactless payments where possible. So going forward and looking to the future, passengers will have to adjust their travelling habits. It's likely they will need to leave more time for the journey. It's likely they'll have to queue at stations, and they might make the train they're intending to get, they might have to get another one if it's busy. So we'll just be asking passengers just to travel responsibly and to take our advice on board. We're looking at things we can do to reduce queuing times at stations. So for example, we're looking at how we retail tickets to see if we can speed up that process. But ultimately, going forward, our focus will be to continually monitoring any government advice and to be responding to that, but just to communicate with our passengers, and when it's safe to do so, to give them the confidence to travel. So as employers across the Liverpool City region, my advice to you would be to check our website and to check the website of all public transport providers to give your employees the latest travel advice, and when it's safe to do so, to give them confidence to travel again. Okay.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you. It's interesting. One of the things you picked up on right towards the end was something I was going to pick up more generally with the panelists, and it was about the, I suppose, the implementation of tech to support this process. And you said about the payment process, people buying tickets. And I was just wondering if I could ask you a question specifically on this. Does this hasten the implementation, for instance, of an Oyster-style ticketing service for Merseyrail?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been focused on it's a future ticketing strategy within the business, and we have made improvements. So at the moment, we're looking to deploy platform validators across our network that would allow an Oyster-style system to be introduced. So we're working closely with Mersey Travel and with other operators on the scheme, but we're definitely, we're looking to accelerate that just to allow passengers to travel using contactless travel payments. We are looking at short-term solutions in the meantime, because projects like this do take time, but absolutely it is a priority for us.
Good stuff. I think it's something that's been talked about for a long time, hasn't it? And it would certainly improve the process across the network, wouldn't it? Thank you for that, though. I had a question come in which is related to infrastructure, but I wanted to open it up to the wider panel. Perhaps Luke from an Avenue HQ perspective might want to answer it. But it's in relation to encouraging people to use bikes to come in to the city centre, for instance, but also more widely, and whether then buildings and facility providers are going to be upgrading their facilities to allow that increase in bike use. Luke, are you able to pick that one up?
Yeah, of course. So across all our sites, we have a lot of bike racks, and we have sharing facilities for everyone who chooses to travel by bike. A lot of our designs are actually impacted by council regulations. So, for example, in Leeds, we were as part of our build there, we actually had to put in a lot of bike racks. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I'd say 10% of them are used right now. So we have a great capacity to welcome in more cyclists. We have a lot of underground, safe, lockable bike storage, and fantastic shower facilities. But as I say, really underused. So I would say, if that's what we know that's one of the safest ways to travel right now. So I would encourage everybody, if you can travel by bike, do it. And Avenue HQ is ready and waiting for you guys to arrive by bike, because we are currently over prepared on that front. So we're ready and waiting, and we encourage other office buildings to do the same and get ready, because I think that, especially the next 6 months, is going to be definitely how things are going to pan out. So we're ready.
Do any of the other building owners or building users have a view on the increased use of cycles to get into the workplace and how they're going to accommodate it?
I mean, maybe Andrew, I could come in here and give a perspective from our point of view. I mean, in terms of where we're based, not surprisingly, people predominantly drive to our site, but actually we've got a very active population who do cycle to work, and we've run a travel hub program for probably about 4 or 5 years. And I think there's two things. I mean, as Luke's highlighted, it's certainly about making sure you've got the right facilities in terms of, it's not just about cycle stores, but it is also about shower facilities, maybe even a drying room for clothing and so on. But also actually focus on making sure people have got information about what are the cycle routes, so make sure that they can use those and get safely to work. Also information around cycle to work schemes. So again, how can employers use that to encourage existing staff who might have previously either driven to work or looked at using public transport, maybe looking at cycling as an alternative option, and cost effectively using the government support mechanisms to actually go out and purchase a bike, or even an electric bike, because now electric bikes can be part of that scheme as well.
John, another thing I'd say that it's great, as employers as well, to look at what you can do for your employees to, almost give an incentive for people to travel by bike. A very simple one is flexible start times. A lot of people don't like traveling by bike in rush hour, and I can completely see why. So something as simple as allowing people who travel by bike to start an hour later, leave an hour later. There's a very simple way to encourage that.
Yeah, okay. Any further comments on that agenda item?
Yeah, hi Andrew. I think I'd agree with Luke's perspective in that through planning policy, the amount of cycle provision in new schemes is certainly in excess of demand that there has been to date. But hopefully this will be the disruptor that encourages people to start making use of those facilities. As we're based in a historic building, a listed building, we've actually been looking at how we can provide better for people who want to cycle into work. I myself cycled to the office today. We actually had a consultation with the staff on shower facilities last year, and interestingly, it was voted that people didn't want the shower facilities because of what it would mean to the changes to the office. But that's probably something we're going to have to look at again. But I think it's just worth saying for all the businesses that are in existing buildings or listed buildings, it's going to be more challenging to create that extra cycle provision and facilities.
Yeah, interestingly, I think one thing from our side, not only John mentioned the repurposing of buildings, but lots of offices nowadays have been built with car parking spaces. The reality is if we see, the volume of your staff coming into particularly city centre sites in a lot lower numbers, that it's likely that lots of those parking facilities will need to be repurposed as well, particularly for bike stores and things like that. So that's certainly something we're looking at, particularly with our office. So I think that is the main challenge. And I think not sure if John's still on the call, but one of the big challenges, obviously the approach we're taking as a firm is to try and do things as one, but travel to and from offices is probably the big challenge we have as regards creating a safe environment for our staff. We do have some people who live in the city centre, but an awful lot of our staff who historically have been office based would travel in by train really. And then when you take that down to London, for example, it's pretty difficult to see how you can open any city centre office without having flexible work and without increasing the ability for people to travel by bike and to have very variable start and finish times, because I'm just not sure how the tube gets up and running to accommodate the capacity it normally would on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, okay, thanks Gareth. I know we've ran over time by 5 minutes, and I was determined to finish on time, so I've failed in that respect already. But I was hoping just to ask one more question, so maybe a further 5 minutes if everybody's able to stay on for that long. And it was around the implementation of tech to support this process. As I said, I touched upon it earlier with Suzanne and Merseyrail, but I just wondered if I could put it out to the wider group, the wider panel. I suppose, what elements of tech are you currently considering to support this return to a new workplace? So by this I'm meaning, an increased use of collaboration software. This is something specifically then for instance, for Victoria and the construction industry. That needs to be more widely spread across the whole industry and not just architects, but also things like contactless entry and temperature controls as we go into buildings. Anybody want to comment on that just in the last 5 minutes?
I think in terms of IT tech, Andrew, if I go first, I think that's developing quite quickly, and I think we're actually embracing lots of technologies that were already in existence. Some of the interesting things that we're looking at, so John obviously mentioned, property plans, and probably our Manchester office is likely to be one of the first offices we look to move to an office which is more on rotational working. Now, some of the things that are there in office spaces, the reality is that there's sensors that you can have that can advise your cleaners when desks need cleaning. There's lots of other technologies that I think will will come into the workspace because people will look to optimize that workspace. So I think the IT technologies, most of them are there. And I think there will be, absolutely right, I guess in Victoria's line, there may well be more collaborative softwares in specific industries. But I think for general businesses, some of the technologies that may come in may well be tools within office environments that advise people, logging into hot desks and advising when hot desks need cleaning. They're the type of things that we're considering really. And the type of technologies, again, some of them are out there. It's just embracing them really.
Yeah, accelerating their use. Victoria, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so I think some of the things will be standard to across multiple businesses. So our phone systems move into, an internet-based phone system that allows handsets to be taken home, and the like is obviously common to lots. But from a creative and a design perspective, one of the things I'm looking at the moment is, e-pens, for example, and e-pencils have evolved quite dramatically over the last couple of years. They were very clunky, in no way a replacement for hand sketching, but that technology has improved significantly recently. And certainly if we're trying to move to online collaboration, working through the design process, the ability to sort of hand draw something and it appear on screen and you're sharing that screen, so it can be and then someone to be able to sketch over that or illustrate their comments, then certainly that would be one step towards overcoming some of our issues with collaboration in the design process. So that's certainly something we'll be looking at. And that also works in with some of our environmental objectives for the next year. Printing and paper usage is one of our biggest downfalls in terms of our environmental impact. So if we can all get more used to marking things up and sketching virtually, then that will be sort of two benefits to us, I think.
Okay, thanks. Any further comments before I look to wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add, agree with Gareth that, a lot of the technology, both IT, contactless and so on, in terms of kind of people getting into buildings and using buildings is largely there. And it's probably just ensuring that you take full advantage of that. I think the one thing that this is sort of drilled home to us is as we move forward, whereas a lot of our events historically have been physical events, face-to-face events, that is going to take quite some time before people are going to feel comfortable, despite what happens in terms of, easing of lockdown restrictions and so on. So actually, therefore, we're going to have to look at how do we take forward a model that actually probably is going to be more of a hybrid in terms of how do we combine our physical events with online events, and looking at the technology we're going to need to do that effectively. But also actually with the long-term benefit that it allows us to reach out to a much wider community than those that might actually be located within a sort of 25 or 30 mile radius of our site, for example.
Sorry, I was muted. Right, well, unless there's any further comments, I will look to wrap up the session by saying thank you to all of the panelists. I know John from Grant Thornton has had to drop off to go to another meeting, but I thought there was a lot of really useful content there, and a couple of themes for me that just stood out, and I hope all of the attendees on the call will take away is one, everybody talked about feedback. So getting feedback from their employees, getting feedback from the users of their buildings has been absolutely essential, and that's going to be an ongoing feedback loop, I would imagine. And the second one linked to that is communication. Communication in its wider forms, whether that be through the use of the physical signage the likes of John and Luke showed from their perspective, or these kind of virtual collaboration tools that allow us to continue to speak whether you're in the office or not. I think the communication with everybody going forward in this period is going to be absolutely key. And I suppose then more generally from my perspective at Professional Liverpool, and again speaking on behalf of the growth platform as well, I think it's important that we continue as a community to continue to share knowledge in this way, to share experiences, and of course our expertise, because there's a lot of expertise that exists right across the city region, and really promote that cooperative nature and the collaborative nature that anybody who's a member of Professional Liverpool would have heard me banging on about, or read my pieces in our weekly e-newsletters. And I think they're going to be essential for the recovery period and the growth period coming out of this, and that's across sectors and across supply chains. So yeah, from my perspective as Professional Liverpool, thank you very much to everybody for participating. Thank you for everybody for joining us. And with that, I will sign off the call. So thank you very much again.